There are men in $5,000 suits whose character isn't worth a tarnished penny. Think money covers cruelty. It only makes the mask more expensive. I cleaned up scandals for the elite, but nothing prepared me for the rot inside my family. When a man discards his blood for a campaign, he hands me the match. Pour a bourbon. Let me tell you how I burned an empire with a 45-second video. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Willow Mendez. At 31 years old, I hold the title of Director of Crisis Management at Apex Horizon Communications, a premier public relations firm nestled in the beating heart of Boston. My daily routine consists of scrubbing the filthy secrets of the financial elite and making their catastrophic mistakes disappear. If a hedge fund manager crashes his imported sports car into a storefront at 3 a.m, I am the one who ensures the morning papers talk about his sudden generous donation to a local orphanage instead. I am trained to be completely devoid of panic, a ruthless architect of public perception. Yet no amount of corporate warfare or scandal maneuvering could have prepared me for the sheer hypocrisy bleeding from my own bloodline. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand the man who orchestrated it. My father, Julian Mendez, is a real estate titan whose name is plastered across half the luxury high-rises in Massachusetts. But building skyscrapers was no longer enough to feed his ego. Julian had recently set his sights on the state Senate. His entire political platform was built on a meticulously crafted, utterly fabricated foundation of protecting traditional family values. He sold the voting public a picture-perfect image of the Mendez legacy, painting us as the ultimate moral compass of the East Coast. The reality was far different. My older sister Clara had always been the authentic heart of our fractured family. A fiercely independent and successful single woman, Clara had recently made the most beautiful decision of her life. She adopted twin baby girls. They were absolute angels, bringing a sudden, desperately needed burst of genuine warmth into our cold world. Tonight was supposed to be a milestone. It was the annual Mendez Spring Gathering at my father's sprawling estate, and Clara was bringing the girls to introduce them to the extended family for the very first time. I was stuck at the office handling a minor crisis for a client, but I had Clara on the phone as her car approached the estate. It was a crisp, cool spring evening. I had personally made sure her travel arrangements were flawless. She was riding in a top-of-the-line armored luxury SUV. In the back seat, the twins were fast asleep, swaddled in soft blankets, and completely comfortable in the independent rear climate control system. Sitting right beside them was the highly credentialed professional nanny I had hired to give Clara a second pair of hands for the night. They were safe, warm, and deeply loved. "We are just pulling up to the main gate," Clara told me over the phone, her voice carrying a nervous but excited energy. "The estate looks packed." I smiled, leaning back in my leather office chair. "Just take a deep breath. You look stunning, and those babies are going to steal the show. Let me know when you get inside." But Clara did not get inside. Through the phone, I heard the heavy wrought iron gates groan but fail to open. Then I heard the muffled sound of a car window rolling down, followed by a voice that made my blood run instantly cold. It was Julian. He had walked down to the security gate himself to intercept her. I pulled up the feed from the high-definition security cameras installed at the estate, a system my firm had actually put in place to ensure his privacy. The live video loaded on my monitor. There was my father wearing a bespoke tailored suit, standing in the driveway with his arms crossed. He looked furious. Clara's voice trembled slightly as she spoke to him. "Dad, why aren't the gates opening? The girls are sleeping. I need to get them inside where it is warm." Julian leaned closer to the window. His face was a mask of pure political calculation and paternal disgust. He was entirely consumed by the fear that a stray press photographer might capture a shot of his unmarried daughter holding two adopted infants, shattering his archaic conservative campaign narrative. "You are not bringing them into this house," Julian hissed, his voice perfectly clear through the phone. "What are you talking about?" Clara asked, the shock evident in her tone. "They are your granddaughters." "They are a public relations liability," he snapped back. "I have donors inside. I have conservative bloc leaders inside. I will not have my traditional family values campaign undermined by your lifestyle choices." Then came the fateful command. His tone was not just cold, it was dead. "Leave those babies outside." He actually expected her to leave her newborn children sitting in the driveway like a pile of unwanted luggage while she paraded around his cocktail party to maintain his lie. Through the screen, I watched Clara process the sheer cruelty of the man who gave us life. I held my breath waiting for her to break down. But Clara did not shed a single tear. She straightened her spine, radiating a quiet, unbreakable dignity. She rolled the window up right in his face. "Turn the car around," Clara ordered her driver, her voice steady and resolute. "Take us home." The heavy SUV backed up its headlights, sweeping across Julian's impassive face before it sped away into the night. Sitting in my office miles away, the phone went dead. I stared at the frozen image of my father on the security monitor. The crisis management executive in me vanished instantly, replaced by a sister whose heart was pounding with an unfamiliar venomous fury. He wanted a war over public perception. He had no idea he had just handed the match to the one person who knew exactly how to burn his entire world to the ground. Within 45 minutes of that dead phone call, I had Clara's driver reroute directly to my residence. My penthouse sat on the 52nd floor of a high-security building in the dead center of downtown Boston. It was a fortress of glass and steel, accessible only by a biometric scan and a private elevator. By the time Clara arrived, I had the guest wing fully prepped. I turned up the ambient heating to a comfortable 72 degrees, laid out plush blankets, and helped her settle the girls into the velvet-lined bassinets I kept in the spare room. Watching my sister gently rock those two beautiful sleeping infants, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city far below, the contrast between the absolute warmth of this room and the freezing cruelty of our father's driveway struck me like a physical blow. Clara looked exhausted, her eyes heavy with a grief she refused to vocalize. I handed her a cup of chamomile tea, kissed her forehead, and promised her that she and the girls were entirely untouchable here. Then I walked into my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. The loving sister ceased to exist. The crisis manager took the wheel. My office was a war room. 3 curved monitors illuminated the darkened space. My first objective was securing the ammunition. Because Apex Horizon handled all of Julian's security architecture, I retained top-tier administrative privileges over the estate's network. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass the standard firewalls and access the main server. I located the exact timestamp of Clara's arrival and initiated a direct download. I bypassed the compressed files and went straight for the raw, unedited, high-definition footage and the isolated audio tracks. I sat in the glow of the screen, slipping on my noise-canceling headphones. I watched the interaction again. I isolated the audio track, scrubbing away the ambient wind and the low rumble of the luxury vehicle's engine until Julian's voice was crystal clear. "Leave those babies outside." I clipped the file, locked it behind a 256-bit encryption key, and saved it to an offline drive. It was a flawless, undeniable digital bullet. But a public relations executive knows that one isolated incident is easily spun by a seasoned political team. They would claim he was misquoted, that he was concerned for their safety, that the audio was manipulated. I needed a pattern. I needed the rot underneath the floorboards. So I started digging into the one thing Julian cared about more than his public image: his money. I spent the next 4 hours tracing his recent financial movements. I utilized the proprietary data tracking software my firm used for opposition research. I cross-referenced every shell corporation associated with his real estate empire, looking for anomalies over the last 6 months. At 2:15 in the morning, I hit a massive glaring inconsistency. A holding company registered in Delaware funded through a convoluted trust tied directly to Julian's campaign finance chairman had just initiated a hostile all-cash buyout of a specific residential property. It was a boutique luxury apartment building in the suburbs. I stared at the address on the screen, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. It was Clara's building. The sheer malice of his plan crystallized in my mind. Julian was not just keeping Clara away from his Gala. He was using a proxy corporation to buy her home right out from under her. As the new owner, he would have the legal right to terminate all month-to-month leases and initiate immediate eviction proceedings. He intended to legally force his own daughter and his 2 infant granddaughters out of their home and inevitably out of the state, just to sanitize his image before the election polls opened in November. It was not just a political strategy. It was an extermination of his own blood. I needed a megaphone, but one that could not be traced back to me. I reached for my encrypted burner phone and dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. Marcus Thorne. Marcus was an independent investigative journalist who used to work for the city's largest daily paper, until he got too close to one of Julian's zoning scandals. Julian had used his influence to utterly destroy Marcus's career, burying him in frivolous defamation lawsuits until the paper fired him to cut their losses. Marcus had been scraping by on a freelance blog ever since. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Who is this calling at 3 in the morning?" Marcus grumbled, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "It is the ghost of your ruined career, Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "I have a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to Julian Mendez's offshore accounts and a blatant campaign finance violation involving a Delaware shell company. I am going to feed you the account numbers, the routing data, and the names of the proxy buyers. You verify the paper trail, you write the exposé, and you get your revenge." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the distinct sound of him sitting up in bed. "Why are you handing me the very man who pays your firm millions of dollars to protect him?" he asked, his journalistic skepticism instantly kicking in. "Because he just made a fatal miscalculation," I said coldly. "He went after my family. Check your secure email in 5 minutes. Do not contact me again until you have verified the transactions." I ended the call. With the trap set, I needed to manage the optics. The most terrifying thing to a control freak like Julian is an unpredictable variable. Early the next morning, I walked into the guest suite. Clara was awake, feeding one of the twins. I sat beside her and laid out the rules of engagement. "Clara, listen to me very carefully," I instructed. "I need you to freeze every single social media account you own. No posts, no stories, no vague quotes about family. Do not answer texts from his campaign staff. Do not answer calls from his assistants. If anyone knocks on the door, you do not exist. We are going completely dark." Clara looked at me, her protective instincts flaring. "What are you doing, Willow?" "I am making them sweat." I smiled a sharp, dangerous expression. "Right now, Julian is expecting you to cry to the press or throw a public tantrum. When you do absolutely nothing, his team will panic. They will scramble to figure out what we are plotting, and in their panic, they will make mistakes." By completely vanishing from the grid, we created an eerie, deafening silence. It was a psychological blackout. We were the storm gathering just beyond the horizon, completely undetectable, while the oblivious king sat on his fragile throne waiting for a strike he could not see coming. The silence I orchestrated lasted exactly 48 hours before the pressure cracked Julian's inner circle. At 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, my office door swung open without a knock. In walked Richard Vance, my father's senior campaign manager. Richard was a man who wore too much cologne and possessed the moral flexibility of a starving mercenary. He bypassed the guest chairs and planted his hands directly on my glass desk, looming over me in a textbook display of manufactured dominance. We have a situation, Willow. Richard stated, his voice a low, grating baritone designed to intimidate. Your sister has gone entirely rogue. She is not returning calls from the family office, and her sudden disappearance is making your father extremely anxious. Anxious candidates make sweeping changes. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. Beneath the edge of the desk, my right thumb instinctively slid over the screen of my phone, silently activating the high-fidelity voice memo application. The device lay face down on my leather blotter, invisible but eagerly listening. Clara is simply taking some time to rest, I replied smoothly, projecting the perfect image of a compliant daughter. New motherhood is exhausting. Richard scoffed, leaning in closer. Let me be entirely transparent with you. Apex Horizon currently holds a $3 million annual retainer with the Mendez organization. That contract is up for renewal in exactly 60 days. Your father expects you to manage your family members just as effectively as you manage our corporate crises. If Clara decides to act out, or if she speaks to a single reporter about that unfortunate misunderstanding at the gate, Julian will assume you are no longer capable of protecting his interests. He will pull the contract. Your partners will hold you personally responsible for losing the firm's most lucrative account. Fix this, Willow. Get your sister in line. It was a beautiful textbook case of corporate extortion. He had just explicitly tied a massive financial contract to my ability to silence a potential political liability. I understand completely, Richard, I said, forcing a tight, reassuring smile. Tell my father he has absolutely nothing to worry about. I will handle Clara. There will be no media fallout. You have my word. Richard smirked, satisfied that he had successfully bullied the crisis manager into submission. He turned and walked out of my office. The moment the door clicked shut, I picked up my phone and saved the audio file to my secure cloud server. I had just acquired the legal leverage to destroy the campaign manager right alongside the candidate. But to make my father truly vulnerable, I needed him to drop his defenses entirely. I needed him arrogant. I initiated the next phase of the strategy by orchestrating a highly controlled leak. I arranged a casual lunch with a prominent society columnist known for having loose lips and close ties to Julian's social circle. Over plates of overpriced sea bass, I let slip a carefully manufactured lie. I confided with feigned sisterly concern that Clara was completely overwhelmed by the local social pressure and was actively finalizing plans to relocate to Geneva. I hinted that she was looking at international preschools and had no intention of ever returning to Boston. The bait was swallowed whole. Within 24 hours, the rumor reached Julian's desk. Believing that the threat of Clara parading her adopted children around his conservative voter base had vanished overseas, Julian grew dangerously overconfident. He instructed his team to accelerate the campaign timeline. The grand political announcement, originally scheduled for late autumn, was suddenly pushed up to coincide with his upcoming corporate milestone. While Julian was busy popping early champagne, I was fortifying the walls around my sister. I quietly hired Evelyn Sterling, the most ruthless and expensive family law attorney on the East Coast. We did not meet at my office or her firm. We met in the soundproof private dining room of an exclusive club. Over the course of 3 hours, I authorized the transfer of my personal stock options, liquidating enough capital to establish 2 ironclad, irrevocable trust funds for my nieces. Julian's wealth was vast, but it was heavily tied up in real estate and campaign liquidity. By locking the girls' financial futures behind impenetrable legal structures, I ensured my father could never use money to manipulate their lives as they grew up. Furthermore, Evelyn drafted a comprehensive restraining order citing the hostile property buyout attempt and the recorded extortion ready to be filed with a federal judge the exact second my father's empire began to collapse. The days blurred into a marathon of tactical warfare, but the evenings were my sanctuary. Every night, I left the ruthless corporate strategist at the door of my penthouse. I would walk into the nursery where the soft glow of a nightlight illuminated the room. I spent hours sitting on the thick carpet playing with those 2 beautiful baby girls. One of them had a habit of wrapping her tiny hand entirely around my index finger, holding on with surprising strength. I would listen to their soft, rhythmic breathing and watch Clara finally sleep peacefully in the adjoining room. These quiet moments were the anchor to my sanity. They reminded me precisely why I was building a guillotine for my own father. I was not doing it out of malice. I was doing it to ensure these children would never have to learn the bitter taste of his conditional love. The final piece of the board fell into place on a rainy Thursday morning. A private courier arrived at the Apex Horizon reception desk, carrying a heavy gold-embossed envelope addressed directly to me. I broke the wax seal with a letter opener. Inside was a VIP all-access pass to the Grand Plaza Hotel. It was an invitation to the Mendez Corporation's 40th anniversary gala, which would now also serve as the official launchpad for Julian's state Senate campaign. Clipped to the thick cardstock was a handwritten note penned in my father's sharp, aggressive handwriting. It read, "You are expected to be at the head table. Come alone. Family unity is our absolute priority this evening. Do not disappoint me." I ran my thumb over the raised gold lettering of his name. He wanted family unity. He wanted a silent, obedient daughter to sit beside him and smile for the cameras while he sold a lie to the world. I folded the invitation and slipped it into my purse. I would give him exactly what he asked for. I would be there front and center when the stage collapsed beneath his feet. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Entering the space felt like walking into a vault of spun gold and crystal. Massive chandeliers, each dripping with thousands of hand-cut prisms, cast a warm, buttery light over a sea of the city's most influential power brokers. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided seamlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne that cost easily $300 a bottle. The air was thick with the scent of imported orchids and the heavy, musky perfumes of women wearing dresses that cost more than most people earned in an entire year. I moved through the velvet-draped foyer in a floor-length emerald silk gown, my posture perfectly straight, projecting the serene, untouchable aura of a loyal daughter. Every step I took was calculated. My expression was a flawless mask of relaxed confidence, effortlessly deceiving the predatory gazes of the political elite who watched my arrival. Near the main entrance, bathed in the relentless strobe of press photography, stood Julian and my stepmother Eleanor. They were holding court, greeting the incoming tide of donors and senators with practiced, dazzling smiles. When Julian spotted me, his eyes flashed with a brief, validating gleam of triumph. He thought he had won. He reached out, pulling me into a rigid theatrical embrace designed exclusively for the camera lenses. "You look stunning, my dear," Julian murmured near my ear, though his tone was entirely devoid of affection. "I am glad you decided to be sensible." Eleanor placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm, flashing a brilliant empty smile for a photographer from a major society magazine. The picture of a united front, just what the campaign ordered. "I would not miss this for the world," I replied, my voice light and agreeable, smiling directly into the flash of a camera. "Tonight is going to be unforgettable." After the mandatory photo opportunity concluded, Julian was swept away by a group of banking executives. I took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and drifted toward the perimeter of the ballroom, slowly making my way toward the massive velvet-draped control booth located at the back of the hall. The room was buzzing with the low, steady hum of networking, creating the perfect auditory cover. I slipped a small rectangular device out of my sequined clutch. It was a military-grade encrypted transmitter that my cybersecurity team used for penetration testing. Keeping my back to the room, I pretended to adjust my earring while sliding the device onto a discreet ledge near the main audio-visual conduit. I tapped a sequence into my phone. The screen flashed green. In less than 20 seconds, my transmitter hijacked the local frequency, seamlessly overriding the hotel's technical crew and granting my secure cloud server absolute exclusive control over the central projection system. The trap was armed. Admiring the architecture willow, I turned slowly. Richard Vance Julian's campaign manager stood uncomfortably close. His tailored suit looked tight across his shoulders, and his eyes darted around the room with the frantic energy of a man trying to manage 100 moving pieces. "Just finding a quiet corner before the main event, Richard," I said, taking a slow sip of my champagne. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "Your father is about to go on that stage and officially launch a campaign that will define his legacy. I see you are here alone, which means you followed instructions. Do not do anything stupid tonight. Do not talk to the press about your sister. Just smile, clap when everyone else claps, and let the adults handle the business. You have absolutely nothing to worry about," I told him, holding his gaze with dead, terrifying calm. "I am only here to watch the show." Richard gave a curt, satisfied nod and hurried away toward the VIP tables. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was exactly 8:15 in the evening. I pulled out my phone, opened my encrypted messaging application, and typed a single word to Marcus Thorne. Execute. Miles away, sitting in his own apartment, Marcus hit a button. Instantly, a synchronized automated blast of highly classified financial dossiers complete with bank routing numbers and the shell company purchasing agreements, fired directly into the private email inboxes of over 100 senior political reporters, federal investigators, and ethics committee members across the entire country. The digital bombs had been dropped. There was no recalling them now. A gentle chime echoed through the ballroom, signaling the guests to take their seats. The ambient conversations faded into an expectant hush as the massive crystal chandeliers slowly dimmed to black. Two heavy spotlights cut through the darkness, converging on the center stage. The crowd erupted into rapturous applause as Julian Mendez stepped up to the polished wooden podium. He adjusted his microphone, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, and offered a warm, benevolent wave to the sea of wealthy donors. "Thank you," Julian began, his voice booming with practiced resonant charisma over the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight is about looking forward, but it is also about remembering what roots us. We are here to talk about the absolute boundless love of the traditional family." I stood in the shadows at the back of the room, my finger resting lightly on the single digital command button on my phone screen. The countdown had reached 0. Julian stood center stage, bathed in the brilliant white glow of twin overhead spotlights. He looked out over a sea of 500 of the wealthiest, most influential individuals on the eastern seaboard. He adjusted his silk tie, leaned into the microphone, and delivered a smile so perfectly engineered it could have been patented. "A true society is judged by how it protects its own." Julian intoned, his voice rich and resonant, echoing flawlessly through the ballroom. "We are facing a crisis of character in this state. We have forgotten what it means to build a foundation. But I promise you this: if you send me to the Senate, I will make protecting our legacy my singular mission. Because, my friends, there is nothing more important than compassion for children." He paused, opening his arms to invite the applause. The audience began to clap. I pressed the button on my screen. The massive digital display stretching 40 feet across the wall behind him, which had been projecting his pristine campaign logo, instantly died. The idyllic blue and red graphics vanished into absolute blackness. The sudden loss of light cast a harsh shadow over Julian. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the elegant crowd. Julian tapped his microphone, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second as he assumed it was a simple technical glitch. "Just a momentary pause, folks," he chuckled smoothly, trying to maintain the rhythm of his charismatic performance. "Even technology gets nervous around this much political power." Then the colossal screen flared back to life. But it was not his logo. It was the high-definition night vision feed from the main gate of his own estate. The towering wrought iron bars filled the display. A sleek armored sport utility vehicle pulled into the frame, and then magnified to monstrous proportions for the entire political establishment to see, was Julian's own face. The ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system tuned to deliver crystal-clear acoustics to every corner of the vast room, crackled alive. The ambient noise of the luxury vehicle's engine hummed through the heavy speakers. Then my sister Clara's voice, trembling with shock, but painfully clear, echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "What are you talking about? They are your granddaughters." The giant face of my father on the screen sneered. His lips moved in perfect, undeniable synchronization with the audio that now blasted at theater volume. His voice was laced with a venomous disgust that completely shattered his benevolent public persona. "They are a public relations liability. I have donors inside. I have conservative bloc leaders inside. I will not have my traditional family values campaign undermined by your lifestyle choices." Julian stood frozen at the podium, his back to the screen, his face draining of all color as his own voice condemned him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then came the final, devastating command, echoing like a gunshot through the hall. "Leave those babies outside." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a suffocating physical weight that dropped over the entire ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. You could hear the faint clinking of ice shifting in a glass 3 tables away. The facade of the ultimate family man was utterly obliterated in exactly 45 seconds. But I was not finished. Before the audience could even process the sheer cruelty of what they had just witnessed, the video vanished. The screen flashed a blinding white, immediately replaced by high-resolution scans of heavily redacted financial ledgers. I had programmed a relentless slideshow of his absolute ruin. Page after page of shell company charters appeared on the 40-foot screen, highlighting the Delaware registry. Bright red digital boxes automatically drew themselves around Julian's personal signature on the aggressive all-cash buyout orders for Clara's apartment building. Suddenly, a synchronized, terrifying sound swept through the room. It was the frantic buzzing and pinging of over 100 cellular phones. Every investigative reporter, every political analyst, every newspaper editor in the room was receiving Marcus's massive data dump simultaneously. They were looking up at the damning documents on the screen, then looking down at the verified banking details glowing on their phones. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. The golden boy of conservative family values was not just a hypocrite. He was actively using dark money to illegally evict his own daughter and his infant grandchildren just to sanitize his campaign image. "Turn it off!" Julian screamed. The smooth, composed politician was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, sweating old man. He spun around, waving his arms wildly at the production booth at the back of the room. "Cut the power! Richard, get the power cut right now!" Richard Vance. The ruthless campaign manager abandoned his glass of champagne and sprinted toward the back of the hall, screaming furiously at the audio-visual technicians. From my vantage point, I watched the tech crew frantically pounding on their keyboards behind the glass window of the control booth. It was completely useless. My script had initiated a total administrative lockout. The system was running on a closed loop, feeding directly from my encrypted cloud server. The only way to stop the broadcast was to physically take an axe to the main server racks in the basement, which would take security at least 20 minutes to breach. Julian looked out into the crowd, his hands trembling as he gripped the edges of the wooden podium. The wealthy donors who had just applauded him were now staring at him in sheer, unadulterated disgust. Several prominent party leaders were already pushing their chairs back, abandoning their $300 meals. Desperate to physically distance themselves from the blast radius of his ruined career, I stepped out from the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains at the perimeter of the room. I walked slowly down the center aisle, moving directly into the periphery of his vision. My emerald silk gown caught the dim light, projecting an image of absolute serene control amidst the escalating panic. When Julian's frantic, terrified eyes finally swept across the room and locked onto mine, he froze completely. He knew. In that single electrifying moment of eye contact across the silent ballroom, the realization crashed over him. He realized that the loyal daughter he thought he had successfully manipulated, the corporate crisis manager he thought he owned, was the sole architect of his total destruction. I did not say a single word. I simply stopped in the middle of the aisle, lifted my crystal flute of champagne high into the air, and offered my father a bright, radiant, absolutely merciless smile. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the vintage champagne, savoring the taste of victory. Then I turned on my heel and began walking toward the exit. Behind me, the fragile silence finally shattered. The room erupted into absolute pandemonium. The shouting voices of aggressive reporters demanding answers blended with the frantic, overlapping commands of his collapsing campaign staff. A tidal wave of camera flashes exploded from the press pool, illuminating the ballroom like rapid lightning, permanently capturing the exact moment the great Julian Mendez lost his empire. I pushed through the heavy golden doors of the hotel and walked out into the cool, clean night air, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the political empire of Julian Mendez was nothing but ash blowing in the wind. The morning news cycles were completely ruthless. Every major television network and online publication ran the security footage on a continuous, brutal loop. The wealthy donors who had clapped for him at the gala were terrified of the immediate public backlash. Within 12 hours, they issued rapid, frantic press releases, severing all financial ties and retracting their endorsements. By noon, the State Ethics Committee officially announced a comprehensive joint investigation with federal authorities into the Delaware shell companies and the illegal weaponized eviction scheme. His senatorial campaign was entirely dead before the ink on his registration papers could even dry. His real estate empire was plunged into a catastrophic stock freefall. At exactly 9 in the morning, I walked into the executive suite of Apex Horizon Communications. I did not sit down. I simply tossed my heavy gold-plated employee access badge onto the senior partner's polished mahogany desk. I resigned effective immediately. The partners were scrambling, begging me to stay and manage the fallout, but I walked out without a second glance. I had spent my entire adult career cleaning up the toxic radioactive spills of terrible men. I was entirely done being a janitor for the elite. A week later, I filed the incorporation papers for Vanguard Integrity, my own independent strategic consulting firm. My operational rule was simple and unbreakable. I only took clients whose morals did not require a bleach scrub before facing the public eye. The final pathetic gasp of the dying king came 3 days later. My highly encrypted personal phone vibrated on my new desk. The caller identification displayed Julian's private line. When I answered, his voice was a chaotic, erratic mixture of raging fury and desperate begging. He demanded I utilize my media contacts to release a statement claiming the security video was a manipulated fabrication, that the financial records were hacked and altered by his political rivals. "You have to fix this, Willow," he pleaded, his breathing heavy and panicked. "You are my crisis manager. You owe me your loyalty." I let him exhaust his breath, listening to the sound of a powerful man realizing he had zero power left. I gave him my final resignation. "I do not create fake news, Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion or sympathy. "I only broadcast the truth." I hung up the phone. Then I permanently blocked his number across all my devices. 2 months later, the suffocating, toxic atmosphere of Boston was miles behind us. I was standing on the expansive cedar deck of a beautiful sun-drenched house, nestled right on the edge of a serene, quiet lake. It was Clara's new home. It was purchased entirely free and clear, utilizing the untouchable trust funds I had aggressively secured from Julian's liquidated assets. The air out here was crisp and entirely clean. Down on the soft, perfectly manicured grass, the twin baby girls were happily practicing their crawling. Their bright musical laughter echoed across the water, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that cut through any lingering darkness. Watching them play in the warm afternoon sun, safely guarded by the sister I loved, I knew with absolute certainty that they would never know the coldness of that iron gate. They were completely permanently safe. Society loves to tell you that blood is thicker than water. But blood means absolutely nothing when the people who share it are perfectly willing to throw you out into the freezing cold the second you become an inconvenience to their ambition. Family is not a biological obligation or a political prop. Family is the people who will stand directly in front of the storm to shield you from the wind, even if the ultimate price of keeping you warm is burning a corrupt empire entirely to the ground. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Vivian Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.